Thank you, everybody, for joining today's Impact webinar. We're just going to give everybody about a minute or so in case anybody needed to download the GoToWebinar before we get started. So just give them a little bit, and then we will jump right in. All right, everyone, let's get started. Today's Impact webinar is going to be on what customer success reports boards want to see. Just a quick introduction. My name is Areya Dargahi, and I'm the Director of Sales. And before we go kind of into the agenda, I wanted to spend a moment and kind of share why I wanted to talk about this topic today. I've been here for 3+ years. I've transitioned from an individual contributor role to a director role, and have confidently spoken with over 1,000 CS leaders. And there is a common denominator across most of them where the CS leaders ultimately want a seat at the table, but kind of struggle on how to present the data. The second reason is we, as an organization, have an incredibly transparent CEO. He shares with us the board slides sometimes before they even go to the board, for certain after, across the entire company. So as director, I have the insight into kind of what we present to our board members, and very similarly, I'm sure what others are presenting to theirs. I've seen a few webinars on this topic before, and a lot of the format of a lot of them are focused more specifically on metrics and what those formulas are in terms of what to present. I think that's really just an easy Google search. So for today, I wanted to change it a little bit and talk about, what board members care about when it comes to CS, why they even care, how to package the data in a way that's easy to understand, easy to interpret, and then ultimately, how do we take that and prove the efficacy of our customer success department in relation to retention, and prove what we're doing is ultimately effective. So essentially, why does it matter? The number one thing is valuation. Any board member, any VC, PE firm, whatever it is, the goal of the investment is ultimately to make sure that this company grows in valuation. And valuation takes shape in a lot of different ways. A lot of times it's the spend. We need to optimize spend to get up to certain revenue numbers. It's more than simply just retention, churn rates, logo retention, things like that. And those that have higher retention rates are valued much higher. Those exit opportunities are going to yield a lot more dividends for the people that invested. So anybody's goal is just, how do we understand the individual metrics? How do we understand the little things that we need to improve to ultimately make this company worth a lot more? So before we kind of dive into the meat of it, I want to take a second and understand which companies have CS directly report to the board. And I have a follow-up question to those that say yes. So I want to just take a second and have people give their responses to the initial poll question. Okay, and we could stop it right there. So I would say that the answers are somewhat surprising. Not incredibly, but 70% of the folks that are on this webinar said that CS does not directly report to the board. Again, coming back to that thing that I mentioned, every CS wants a seat at the table. So I do have a follow-up question for those, the 27% that did say yes. And I want to understand, how long do board slides typically take to prepare? So let's give everybody a minute, 30 seconds or so, to kind of understand how long these typically take. Awesome, and we could stop it there. So 23% of those that report to the board said that they get it done in under an hour. You are the minority. 42% said that it's between 1 to 3 hours, and 35% said that it is over 3 hours. Not surprising, again, just the amount of data that customer success ultimately has to report on over 3 hours is what I initially expected. So I'd like to start off in talking kind of about the cost and impact of higher retention. So Harvard Business Review says that it's about 5 to 25 times more expensive to acquire a new customer than retain a current customer. If we look at the visual over here to the right, the cost to acquire $100 of revenue, there's a lot that goes into play before the sale is made. The marketing dollars, the salespeople, the overhead that goes into that. And once that sale is made, the ultimate cost of customer success is a lot lower, right? So if we have a funnel with a leak, right, and we have to ultimately make up for the companies or the customers that we lose, and that's expensive, you can imagine how there's a lot of spend, there's a lot of revenue going out of the window to continuously keep that growth going. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of the compounding impacts of higher retention. Small changes make a very, very large difference in the long run. So we're looking at this sample company. This is a company who has been in business for 60 months, so 5 years, and if they had 0% churn, they would be netting about $60 million in ARR. You'll see that around the 12-month mark, we don't notice big enough differences. There is some, but it's not really impactful. When we look at 24 months, you start to see a bigger delta and a pretty large delta once we get to the 36-month marker. If you take a look at this, so at 4% gross churn, this company over the course of the 5 years is ultimately netting 16 million. And if we cut that down just by 2%, we're actually netting $10 million more than that. Cut it down just 1%, a $14 million difference. The reason why I bring this up, again, speaking with over 1,000 leaders, typically anybody will say anything over 90% retention, it's pretty good, right? Not really looking at the impact of even increasing that retention rate 1, maybe 2% makes a huge, huge difference in the overall valuation of the company. So we should always be focused on what we could do, even if we can marginally improve that retention rate, because the impact is pretty significant. So other metrics in terms other than cost of acquisition and retention rates that boards tend to care about, I've taken a screenshot directly out of our ChurnZero Churnopedia. We're going to send this out to everybody who attended the webinar or signed up. This booklet will have all of the metrics along with all of the formulas to calculate these again, but I didn't want to really make this the focus of, I didn't want to make formulas the focus of today's conversation, but expect to get that around 24 hours or so after this webinar completes. So now I want to talk a little bit about how do we present the data? How do we make it easy to interpret? So we saw that 35% of our folks said it took them over three hours to put together those slides. Again, not incredibly surprising. CS reporting is inherently difficult because it requires data from so many different places. If you think about it, when a sales data is all in their Salesforce or their CRM, and there's not a lot of it, right? There's some opportunity data, some close rates, firmographic data, contact data, stuff like that. But once somebody ultimately becomes a customer data tends to live in a lot of different places. Ticketing systems, usage platforms, learning management systems, invoicing platforms, obviously your CRM, right? So what we ultimately have to do is get all of this data into one place and then create something that's easy to interpret. But to take it a level further, it's all about segmenting the data. All of our customers are not the same, and we shouldn't report on them as if they were. So we need to be able to provide that level of granularity on maybe our larger customers versus our monthly customers, maybe customers that are using different products. So, little bias, but CS platforms make this a lot easier because their main function is ultimately to aggregate different customer data sources and then understand how they tie in with each other. So having that data in one place is going to allow you to significantly cut down the amount of time that you spend preparing these. I'm not going to say 1 or 2 clicks, but I could say that those 35% that just said, over 3 hours, I'm almost confident that, CS platforms, no matter who you go with, can probably cut that down to under 30 minutes. And I wanted to actually give you a sense of how the segmentation can actually work. So the next slide is a little GIF I made looking at ChurnZero's reporting and the segmentation. So it's going through, and while it's looking at all of our customer data, I'm applying 2 different customer segments, our enterprise customers as well as our monthly customers. And you can see very easily, without doing additional calculations, we're easily able to report on just that area of the business. So next I want to talk a little bit about how do we prove the efficacy of the CS operation. This becomes even harder because along with all of that other customer data that we just spoke about needing to actually present something that is easily that boards can easily interpret, now we need to add another layer, and that's actually activity data that's coming from the work the CSMs are doing day in and day out. The type of activity also matters more. As we know, a call is going to be a little bit more effective than an email. So we have to understand what type of activity is yielding the results. And segmentation is even more important because the level of activity, keeping it simple, the level of activity that's going to go into really creating an ideal SMB customer is going to be completely and wildly different than an enterprise customer, especially even in by way of the type. SMB customers, we could get away with a little bit more automation activity, email, automated emails and things of that nature. Where we know with enterprise customers with really lofty goals and heavy strategy, those are going to be things that we can't cover just from email activity that's going back and forth. So what I wanted to kind of show is, again, going back to some ChurnZero custom dashboards and looking at activity relation and activity level in relation to health. So if we look at kind of the bottom half of this slide, I've segmented this this customer base and seeing how the amount of activity has actually impacted their health scores or the distribution of health. And we could see that the more activity that we're doing, our little red slice of the pie here is getting continuously smaller. On the right, you could see that those companies that we have greater than 5 activities in the last 30 days with, we don't even have anybody in the red, obviously telling us that the more activity, the better, at least for this market segment. So a few takeaways. Again, really small changes in retention will make a huge impact on company valuation. CS board reports should be using data from all different systems. Again, your CRM, ticketing system, LMS, invoicing platform, I mean, you name it. And then segmenting the data really makes it easier to understand and then also prove the efficacy of the work that we're working really hard in putting in. So I'd like to open it up for some Q&A for the next minute or so, and I'll give it a second until a few questions come in. We do have our first question. So what are some of the metrics that ChurnZero reports to its board? So we report on obviously some of your standard stuff, but I think that we collect a lot of data and we like to report on some things that maybe are maybe not so obvious. The speed of adoption of new features as they get released, right? Do people like the new stuff that we're releasing? Where customers are in their onboarding process and how the metrics compare to last quarter as well as last year. We definitely report on how many customer references we've identified in the last quarter, and again, comparing it to the same time last year. One of the Also, one of the things that we also track and report on is not just our survey scores and responses, but the response rates and compared to last quarter and last year. So we obviously want to see more of our customers actually returning the surveys that are sent in or sent out. For our second question, with the slide on proving efficacy, how does a company kind of find out ideal activity levels? I wish I had a clear-cut answer for you. I don't think it's that simple, and you can walk in with an explicit number and hope it gets there. I think first and foremost, you have to make the commitment on putting in the activity. You have to stick to it and then measure its impact over a period of time. For smaller customers, that time period could probably be a little bit smaller. For larger ones, obviously longer. But you have to continuously iterate on it and change it up if necessary. I don't think anybody's going to walk into with a magic number or magic bullet, if you will. It's continuously looking at the data, iterating on it, and that cycle will probably continue forever. Awesome. Well, I want to thank everyone for the time today. Again, my name is Areya Dargahi, Director of Sales here at ChurnZero, and I hope everybody has a good rest of your day.